Chapter 15 Soulmate. I began the second half of my sophomore year feeling less worried about my family and more confident about school. My tia Kana, who was taking care of my father in Mexico, wrote to my mother telling her that our father continued to be ill physically and mentally, but that with the help of a curandera, he was slowly recovering. She told my mother that he prayed for us every day. Roberto and his wife provided support and comfort to my family by visiting often and helping them out financially. My mother began working in a vegetable processing freezer during the week. Trumpita kept on working as a custodian for the Santa Maria window cleaners, and my other siblings helped my mother work in the fields on weekends. I continued sending money home whenever I could. Besides taking 17.5 units of course more than that second semester and enjoying all of my classes, I found a soulmate who made me feel more at home in college. I met Laura Facchini in the Survey of Latin American Literature taught by Dr. Hardman de Batista. Laura stood out in the small class because everyone else in it had taken the first part of that course the previous semester, and because she was the only freshman and the only one who was not a native Spanish speaker. The other students were from Central and South America and the Caribbean. She caught my attention immediately when I saw her for the first time. She had big brown eyes, a light olive complexion, a high forehead, a narrow, slightly rounded chin, and short brown hair turned under. She reminded me of a girl with whom I was secretly infatuated when I was in junior high school. I always sat next to Laura because I seldom saw her outside of class, and when I did, she always seemed to be in a hurry, scurrying across campus, clutching her books and binders. One day she came to class a few minutes late, looking hassled. She sat down next to me and opened her Latin American literature anthology to the section on Rubén Darío, a Nicaraguan writer whose poetry we were to have read and studied for homework. I glanced over and saw that she had written in pencil numerous notes in the margins and the English translation of practically every Spanish word in the text. She caught my eye, smiled, and pulled her book closer to her and closed it halfway. I felt embarrassed and looked away. Professor Hardman de Batista made a few remarks about Darío and assigned each one of us a different poem to read aloud and analyze. I felt nervous and intimidated as I listened to students read with drama and confidence. However, I was surprised that Professor Hardman de Batista had to guide them so closely through the analysis. This was not the case with Laura. Even though she had a slight accent when she spoke, her reading was smooth and her interpretation impressed everyone, especially the teacher. At the end of the class period, I followed her out of the classroom. "Where did you learn Spanish so well?" I asked, trying to keep up with her fast pace. A light breeze pressed her floral cotton dress against her slightly bowed legs. "Oh, I don't know Spanish that well." She glanced at me from the corner of her eye and smiled. "But you do." I liked her modesty. "I like Spanish and work hard at it. That's why I decided to major in it. I enjoy learning languages. I guess I take after my grandfather, who studies French and Spanish on his own." When I told her I was impressed with her interpretation of Rubén Darío's Canción de Otoño and Primavera, she explained that her high school teacher had taught her how to analyze literature. "I am still struggling with English. I wish I knew Spanish as well as you know English. Maybe we can study together." We were approaching Nobility Hall. "I'll help you with Spanish and you can help me with English." She frowned and said, "Well, here we are. Luckily, I don't have to climb too many stairs. I live on the second floor. Thanks for walking with me." "You're welcome. See you in class." I opened the entry door and she dashed up the stairs. Maybe she thought I was being too forward. For the next few days, I did not walk with her after class, even though I wanted to. Then, to my surprise, I saw her come into the language lab in Varsity Library one evening. I was working there setting up audio tape players, signing out audio tape cassettes, and closing the lab in the evenings. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Mr. Vari hired me to help out in the lab. I guess we'll be working together." This was music to my ears. It gave me a chance to see her more often, and as days went by, after we closed the lab, we spent time together sitting on the front steps of the library sharing stories about our childhood. Once I told her about my efforts to pick cotton when I was 6 years old. My parents used to park our old jalopy at the end of the cotton fields and leave me alone in the car to take care of Champita. I hated being left by myself with him while they and Roberto went off to work. Thinking that if I learned to pick cotton, my parents would take me with them. One afternoon, while Champita slept in the back seat of the car, I walked over to the nearest row and tried to pick cotton. It was harder than I thought. I picked the balls one at a time and piled them on the ground. The shell's sharp prongs scratched my hands like a cat's claw and sometimes dug into the corner of my fingernails and made them bleed. At the end of the day, I was tired and disappointed because I had picked very little. To make things worse, I forgot about Trumpita, and when my parents turned, they were upset with me because I had neglected my little brother who had fallen off the seat, cried, and soiled himself. "Poor Trumpita, and you too," she said. She buttoned her white wool knit sweater, looked up at the stars, sighed, and told me that how she helped her parents at their grocery store when she was 6 years old. The name of her family store, Hilltop Market, had a sign with the motto, "Not the biggest, but the finest." The customers were people who had moved from the rural South and Oklahoma and lived in the modest houses tucked in the hills above the store in Brisbane, California. She would order a chicken every week for their Sunday dinner, and Laura and her mother would clean and package it for them. On Saturdays, customers would come into the store to pick up their order, or Laura's father would deliver the chickens along with the family's grocery orders to their homes. She said that her father bought the chickens from a poultry house in San Francisco, and she would often go with him to see how the chickens were processed. The chickens were held in square cages about 2 feet high each, stacked up 4 or 5 cages tall. Laura's dad would pick out the chickens he wanted, and then the chickens would be delivered to a big noisy room where they were killed and their feathers removed. All of this work was done by women who wore black rubber aprons, boots, and gloves. Once the feathers were removed, the heads and feet were wrapped in butcher paper and the chickens were put in crates, and Laura and her father would bring them to the store. Laura would help her mother prepare the chickens according to the orders. They would cover the kitchen table with layers and layers of newspaper. Her mother would open the chicken, and she and Laura would carefully remove the intestines, heart, and liver. I used to play with the feet. By pulling on a tendon, I would make them move as if they were walking, she added, chuckling. Roberto, my older brother, used to do that too. He would take the chicken feet and tell us it was a rooster's foot. He'd pull the tendon as fast as he could and chase my brothers and me around, hollering that it was the devil's foot. We thought it was so funny. Why would he say it was the devil's foot? Because it's a superstition that devil has rooster's feet, when he transforms himself into a man. Really, you don't believe that, do you? No, but some people do. Suddenly, I realized I had interrupted her story. I am sorry, I said. Finish telling me how you and your mother prepared the chickens. There isn't much more to tell. I think my mom was really proud that she would fill all the orders in time so people could have a nice Sunday dinner. She smiled, glanced at her watch, and said, "It's getting late. We'd better do our homework." I walked back to Nobili and watched her rush up the stairs. She and I continued sharing stories every day after we closed the lab. The more time we spent together, the more I appreciated our friendship. I learned to trust her and developed a deep affection for her.